Are there any Panthers fans in here? Is anybody a Panthers fan? Like Carolina Panthers? Well, no, I know a lot of you guys are like transplants or whatever. Is anybody a Panthers fan? Nobody. Holy cow. Okay. The Vikings play the Panthers this weekend. So. Okay. Well, Ishan was supposed to come because he had some stuff to say, but I don't know. He's not here. Okay, so announcements, several big things, right? We're starting to get back into the thick of things. Getting over the like hangover test and not hating economics. No recitations next week. Unless I get a text from Ishan that he has some different plan. There are still going to be lectures on Monday and Wednesday, but I'll have them up online and like during while I'm doing them, and also have them online like afterwards, like the recordings. I apologize that I've been getting those out a little bit later than I had wanted to this past week. Just had some other stuff going on. There are no office hours today. I think I told you guys on Monday, but I have this big presentation thing, so I need to get ready for it. I will have office hours from 1 to 3 tomorrow. Writing assignment 2 is available to start. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the expectations for it. Okay, Ishan just sent me what he was going to say. So as far as recitations this week goes, for those of you who were not in class, or who not in class, for those of you who would have had one yesterday, but it was canceled, and we wanted to like make sure that that would be the right case. He is going to have his normal recitations. Can somebody tell me what the Thursday recitation times are?
9:30.
9:30 and 11:15.
11.
Wait, there are 2 though, right?
Yeah,
One
one's
that-
at 9:30.
yeah. Okay, where is the one at 9:30?
Gardner?
Gardner,
Yeah.
Haynes,
Haynes.
which is across from Gardner. And what room? Haynes 130. Thank you very much collectively. Haynes 130 at 9:30. You can go to that one if you want to and write it down. It might be a little crowded in there. It's not clear to me how crowded it normally is, depending on how many people show up. And then 11 o'clock on Thursday, Peabody, which is that building, right? Like it's on the road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, just on the other side down there, Peabody. What room? What?
2094.
2094, and that building's like a maze a little bit, if I remember right. So 2094 at 11, you can go to that one too. All recitations this week are gonna be optional though, so yeah, go to that one if you want to do the material. Ishan is also going to have a room in Phillips 0265, which I think is the normal Tuesday office or the normal Tuesday recitation. You guys are in Phillips, right?
We're in,
Oh, you are? So what the heck is that? Okay, well, I'm writing this down for you guys then. Okay, he's going to be in Phillips Hall 0265 from 3:35 to 5 p.m. And this week, that is going to be specifically for people who missed recitation, and he will go through the recitation. I think that's the same time as your Tuesday recitation, right? So hopefully, if you want to go, you'll be able to, because you won't have a Tuesday, Thursday class, obviously, but maybe you have some other thing. But yeah, Phillips Hall 0265 from 3:35 to 5. Again, that'll be specifically, the first hour, he said, will be specifically for recitation, and then recitation and recitation related questions. And then he's going to stick around and he's going to start having office hours from 3:30 to 4, Ishan office hours, additional office hours. Sorry, 3:30 to 4:30 for people, because he's determined that some people can't come to his office hours or my office hours. So he's adding another office hour. As far as help goes and stuff, just also remember that Gardner, there regularly are Econ 101 ULAs and other TAs who could be helpful if they're not working with students. So hopefully across all of those resources, there should be people who can help you as we're moving forward. Yeah. Thursday. Okay. This is totally optional. He's just doing it for people who want to go, and it will function like a recitation. He will take out the sheet and he will work through the recitation sheet for the first like 45 minutes or whatever. And then he's going to stick around and have like extra office hours. Yeah, that room, the Gardner room was taken, so you can't use it. So that's, if you want to go to a makeup recitation, you can do it then. You do not have to. You can go to another one. We're also going to put the like answer key online if you want to work through it on your own. Hopefully across all of those things, it'll be able to work out. It'll be able to work out for you in like a seamless, easy enough way. Okay. Okay, so yeah, writing assignment 2 is available. I'll talk about that today a little bit. Just remember problem set 4 is due tomorrow night. So I haven't had anybody come to I didn't have anybody come to my Monday office hours this week. So I'm anticipating some people will come tomorrow. Just make sure, like I said, that you're putting in a good effort on it, right? That you don't just look at it, maybe you know how to get the answers or something. I don't know how that would be possible, but and then you just regurgitate something down. This one will be graded like problem set 2, a mix of completion and correctness. So yeah, just make sure you're giving it a good effort because you're going to get the feedback in how you do and like looking at the answer key, and then that'll be able to tell you what you need to go through on the first 3 chapters that we've gone over as we continue moving forward. Okay. The poll everywhere questions are for review. We're going to go over those, so you can fill those out. Like they should be pretty quick. Does anybody have any questions about any of the things that I just said?
I've got a cool question
Yeah.
about exam 2. So is it going to be cumulative?
No,
Oh,
not
so it's just an
cumulative. Yeah, just macro. I mean, it's the only cumulative sense that it's going to be is like today, we're going to talk about aggregate demand and aggregate supply
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
macroeconomic equilibrium. And I'm not going to go through how to solve like step by step by step, like, so that kind of
It's like
thing.
with, like questions.
Yeah, but the material is all going to be just what we've covered, chapters 12 through, I think, chapter 19 or 20, but I think we skip a chapter. So also make sure you're paying attention because we're doing chapter 16 today. For those of you who read beforehand, and then we're going to do chapter 18 is like the next chapter. So we're skipping 17 for now. We're going to come back to it. Okay. Okay, any more questions? That was a good question. Okay. Okay, before we get started, I wanted to kind of now we're gonna like talk about class again, but I just wanted to bring it up because I just feel like the things that are going on that have happened in the past will continue to happen in the future. They suck, and in some cases they're really permanent, and hopefully this will be helpful to make that different. Okay. Okay, so let's move on. So today we're talking about chapter 16, aggregate demand and aggregate supply. This is like if supply and demand, this is the analog to supply and demand for micro to macro. What I mean by that is we're going to be talking about this. And then in chapter 18, we're going to be coming back to it, chapter 19, chapter 17, chapter 20, chapter 21. It's going to be something that's like the basis for all the rest of the stuff that we do. So we really want to make sure we understand the basic components of it. One, because I think it's important if you care about economics at all. 2, because you're definitely going to be tested on it in a big way. Okay, like both like the simple parts and then the build-ups to it. Okay, so definitely today, tomorrow, take Friday, spend some time going through these notes. If you don't think you understand, do some practice problems, that kind of stuff. Before we get started on that, I'm going to talk about writing assignment 2. So it's up on Sakai. I just put it up just now. What I'm looking for you to do in writing assignment 2 is I want you to find a country and a time period where there was a significant change in the country's GDP. You can figure that out based on, I gave a link to the World Bank's real GDP per capita website where they show kind of, and you guys, when you go to recitation, you're also going to use the same website where they show kind of countries over time. But what I mean by a significant change, it should be obvious. A country like the United States on average has about like a 3 percentage point real GDP growth every year. Sometimes it's like 1 or 2, sometimes it's like 4 or 5, but it's around there. There are other countries at other times in certain time periods that might have had like a 30% growth rate or a negative 30% growth rate. Something like that, something where it's like, wow, that's a huge number, negative or positive. And 30 might be really high, a negative 30 might be really high, but even a negative 5% growth rate is really bad because negative numbers are bad. So find a country where that's the case. And then what I want you to do is I want you to briefly tell me like about your country, like the country or the region that you chose and what the event was, like give me a brief background because I might not know about the event. And then talk to me about, based on like their aggregate production function or aggregate demand and aggregate supply, why why their economy is growing so much or why it's shrinking so much. Okay. Yeah. Yes, it is. It's all going to get put on Sakai. Take this at one more reminder. When you guys do your problem set 4, if you could go into your accounts and make sure that you have your PID as your like student ID in the account. But yes, we are working on it. I'm hopeful that it'll happen sometime after today, like maybe next week-ish. Okay, because we're just trying to figure out, basically the only way I know how to do right now is to manually input it for everybody, and I don't want to do that. So I'm trying to figure out a new way to do it. And I've spent a little bit of time on it. Ishan has as well. We're trying to find out how to do it. Okay, but it will happen definitely before the second final or midterm. Definitely before the end of October, because I just want you guys to be able, like, I think you get like a midterm grade or whatever, and I want it to be showing up on there. Because for most of you guys, your grade will probably go up like 2 or 3% or something like that. Now, I mean, if you didn't turn any of the problem sets in, you haven't been going to recitation, et cetera, then obviously it's going to go down. But for most people, I think pretty much everybody, your grade should go up 2 or 3% based on what your final is or what your midterm was. Maybe even a little bit more than that, depending on how you did. Okay, so, but yeah, so that's a good question. But yeah, writing assignment 2. So yeah, so just like writing assignment 1, it's going to be 0 minus check plus, where anything minus and above, like minus check or plus, all get you full credit. A 0 just means you turn in a blank sheet of paper, you didn't draw a graph, you wrote gibberish, wrote something that was totally unrelated to what we were talking about, turned in the wrong assignment, those types of things. Okay. But I think this could be a fun assignment. I don't want it to be too much of a time sink, but yeah, same deal, like about 1 page, double space, all of that's on the writing prompt. Then on another page, put your graph. Yeah, so the one example I think that I put, there are like the only things I say that are off limits as far as things that you can do are, I put an example on the writing prompts. Can't use that example. You're also going to go over a few examples in recitation. You can't use those examples. Okay, and then I don't want anybody to do the coronavirus pandemic because otherwise I think everybody will do that. So pick something different, because I know that growth rates went down when the coronavirus happened, right? Like pick something different, okay? Yeah, and if you have any questions, you're like, I have no idea what kind of events you're talking about. Like a big event, for example, that influenced everybody was World War II. Now, I don't know how you pick a specific country, but like, I'm not going to give you a million different, if I give, what I've done in the past is I've given a specific event and then literally like half of the class did that one event that I gave as an example. So, okay, Christopher.
The ETF function, does it only shift when the physical capital is constant? Or will physical capital also shift?
Physical, if you have changes in physical capital, that's a movement along, but you can have a shift and a movement along. You absolutely could. Does that make sense? So you could get more or less productive and you could have more or less capital. That could happen like in the same period of time. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like technology and capital shift.
Only technology. Yeah. So what I say more generally is things that make your physical capital more productive, shift it. Generally, specifically, that's usually what we call technological progress or human capital changes. Okay. Okay. Any more questions on that? Okay, cool. Let's do the review questions. So in 2019, Venezuela had a contested election that led to the current power retaining control. on possibly shaky grounds. I said possibly because it depends on like, I don't know what you think. I'm not gonna get into it. As a result of this, any momentum to invest in education is destroyed. What do we think would happen? Real GDP increases. Oh, and this should all say, I'm sorry, this should say per capita. But I forgot to put that in. So do we think that real GDP is going to go up or down per capita? And do we think that the aggregate production function is going to, or do we think that it's going to be due to a movement along the curve or a shift in the curve? What do people, let's see. Presenter. Let's see. Why is this not working for me? Okay, well, I can't see it. Okay, did it work? Could you guys see the questions? Why can't I see them? All right, well, okay, well, let's just talk about it then. Sorry about that. So we have invest in education. One of the examples that we had for human capital changes is, or ways that the government could influence real GDP per capita, right, was they could invest in education. Education is something that makes you humans more productive, human capital higher. So I was thinking that it would probably be due to a shift up in the, shift down in the APF over time. We would see real GDP per capita decreasing. Then the next question, if a country's real growth rate is 8%, then by the rule of 70, roughly how long will it take for the country's real GDP to double? This one, we just can use the rule of 70, right? Where we say that the double time is equal to the 70 divided by the growth rate, okay? So then that means that it's about 8.75 years, if I did that correctly. Yeah. To go, yeah, the half. Yeah, yeah. Is that helpful? Yeah, I think there's a problem set question. So yeah, if it's a negative number, then yeah, you can't have a negative amount of time, but then it's saying that's how many years it takes to have. Yep, for sure. For sure. Okay. Okay, let's get into chapter 16. So first we're going to talk about real gross domestic product. Again, that's what we're going to talk about the whole class. Today we're going to talk about the what's called the canonical, I think is how you pronounce that word, GDP equation. If you guys took macroeconomics in high school, you might have seen this, where you have Y, which is just, this is just real GDP. Why do we call it Y and not real GDP? Because I think people like writing out one letter better than they like writing out many letters. Y usually refers to output. Why is it called Y? Because it's on the Y-axis. I'm almost positive that's the case. So hopefully that should be straightforward. So Y, and then we have equal to C plus I plus G plus NX, which is, and then I'm going to go through what all of these things are in a sec, right down here. But this is the like kind of canonical model. So for those of you who are like super into like going down the rabbit hole on Reddit or YouTube or whatever, you might have learned that some people don't like this equation and there's criticisms of it. That's totally fine. There are absolutely criticisms of like how this explains growth and output. But I'm gonna say there are criticisms of every kind of school of thought in macroeconomics. So when we talk about micro, we don't really care about any of that stuff because it's very founded in just individuals' behaviors, and which is just an empirical question. Macro gets a lot more into the clouds of the world, if that makes sense. Just because it's a lot more complicated to think about certain things. So, and if you are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, Jacob, that's fine. I just feel like I've had students come up to me in the past and be like, did you know that this is like really criticized on Reddit? It's like, yes, it doesn't matter. Like, not only is it criticized in Reddit, it's criticized like economists criticize certain things about it. But it's like it's like what we're going to start with. The idea is that real GDP, so grow output, is compromised of several things. One thing that it's compromised of is consumption spending. Okay, so people spend money on, they consume things, right? Output has to be consumed, or output has to be invested, right? Or it has to come from government spending, or it has to come from outside or get shipped outside, right? Like everything that gets produced, which is the Y on the left-hand side. I guess this is your guys' left-hand side. I'm going to do this way though. On the left-hand side, everything that gets produced has to either be consumed, invested away, governments has to spend it, or it has to come from inside or outside, right? Okay, so that's what's going on. That's all that we're saying. It's kind of like an accounting identity. And each of these things, so if we think for some reason, like, why do we care about this equation? What is it saying? If for some reason we might suspect that consumption spending is going to increase, so C is going to go up. Well, what's that going to do to real GDP? It's going to make it go up, right? Or it has to go up. Output has to go up. Same thing with investment spending or government spending. Like all we're saying is these have linear relationships. If one of them goes up, real GDP has to go up. If one of them goes down, all else equal, ceteris paribus, real GDP has to go down. Okay. So just, yeah. Yes. Yeah. So this is just saying it's net exports. Net exports is calculated taking exports minus imports. We're going to talk about trade, international trade in chapter 21, more specifically. But the idea is if there are certain, so like these are going to be our next chapters. We're going to talk about consumption and investment, and then how monetary policy affects that. We're going to talk about government, fiscal policy, which is the G, and then we're going to talk about international trade, exports, and imports. That's kind of like the roadmap of where we're going here. But if we suspect that any of these things is going to change, then that's going to change our output as well. Our output has to change. Okay. Okay. So first thing we're going to talk about is aggregate demand. Okay. Aggregate demand is a curve that shows the relationship between the price level and the quantity of real GDP demanded by households, firms, and the government and the rest of the world. Okay. So it's like, oh, this is kind of like our micro demand for a market, right? The only difference is this is not a single market. This is everything. This is all output. It includes firms as demanders of output, right? Because firms are the ones who are investing in things. So we're not breaking out consumers and producers here, households and firms. They both are demanders of real GDP. Then you have the government. And then you have also the rest of the world who demands our output. And remember, real GDP, it's output. It's just the stuff we produce. And it doesn't have to be physical stuff. It can be intellectual stuff. It can be products, services, those types of things. Okay. So all that it is though, because we just have the price level. You can just say, if you put P on the y-axis too, I don't care. That's fine. I'm probably always, when I write it out, going to put PL because that tells me I'm looking at the aggregate economy. But you can put P too. I don't care. I think your book does P, if I remember right. Doesn't matter to me. is going to be on the y-axis. Oops. And then real GDP is going to be on the x-axis. Usually, I think we say real GDP per capita, but that's fine. Also, I know I went on this tirade about y being real GDP and then it being on the y-axis, but then, and that's only true for the aggregate production function. Then when we go to aggregate demand, it's on the x-axis. So I don't know why it's called y. But just like with the market, there is a downward relationship between aggregate demand. Okay, notice here that I label it AD. I swear to you, if you want to test, call it D. You're not going to get points for labeling it, right? It's got to be AD, all right? The slope of the aggregate demand curve is negative. What does that mean? As the price level goes down, output should go up. Okay, that's the relationship between the two. Okay, so now I'm going to just write this out explicitly because I didn't do it I didn't do it in the first section, but a movement is a change. So movement along the curve is a change in the aggregate quantity demanded by a change in the price level. Okay, the difference between that and a shift is that a shift is a change in the aggregate quantity demanded at every price level. Okay, at every price level, you have a new quantity demanded. So that should just tell you what a shift is. So then when we go and we talk about other things like, it's like, oh, is this shifting aggregate demand? Is it moving it along the curve? Or is this a totally different curve that we're talking about that is unrelated to aggregate demand? Okay. Let's see here for a second. You want to write this down? All right. Next thing here. There, just like in micro, there are going to be things that can shift aggregate demand. First one is expectations of households and firms. So firms and households think that the price level is going to change. They're going to change their real GDP, like their demand for output. Okay. What that means is that if they think the inflation rate is going to change, if actually expectations of inflation for the price level or maybe interest rates. So just to be clear, the price, when we're talking about the price level changing, that's what inflation is. If the price level goes up, that means we have a positive inflation, right? You take the new price level minus the old price level divided by the old price level. If your new price level is higher than your old price level, right? Inflation is just price level in time 2 minus price level in time 1 over price level in time 1, right? So whenever I say the price level changes, I'm talking about inflation. Okay, that's something that I think students get confused with. So I just want to be clear up front. If households and firms are worried about prices changing, if they're worried about the interest rate changing, or if the interest rate does change, that's going to influence consumers. So households are they're the consumption, right? So if we think that consumption is going to change, that's going to change output, which is what aggregate demand is related to, or firms who are investors, okay? So when we see households, we should be thinking C, 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 C. C is going to change, C is going to change, C is going to change. When we see firms, we should think I, investments going to change, investments going to change, okay? Changes in wealth across the board, that's just like the last one. So I wasn't explicit with the first one, but if wealth increases, aggregate demand increases or shifts right. Okay. For expectations of households and firms, it's the same thing as in the micro setting. So if you think prices are going to be higher tomorrow, or if we're going to get into this more explicitly, so I'm going to actually leave it broad for now, because we're going to talk about how interest rates influence it in chapter 18, I think. Okay. And then the last one's policy intervention. The government can, so this is a little bit different, where when we were talking about micro and we had markets and you could do taxes, subsidies, price floors, price ceilings, those didn't shift supply and demand. Here, the government can directly influence through fiscal policy and monetary policy aggregate demand, okay? And we'll get into those, but I'll write them down for you now. Monetary policy. Okay, so the next thing that we have, this is going to be short run aggregate supply, which is the relationship between the aggregate price level and the quantity of output producers are willing to supply. We also have this thing called short run here. This is a new term, okay? New terminology, important terminology for what we're talking about. Because in macro, we care a lot about time, right? So there's going to be a breakup between short run equilibrium and then the long run equilibrium, and how we can get to go from the short run to the long run. Okay, in the short run, wages and input prices are fixed or sticky. If you go take macro 420, they call them sticky wages. So the price producers can receive for output increase. So as the price producers receive for output increases, producers will be more profitable and increase production. Okay, so the thing here, it's like, what does that mean? The wages are sticky. Okay, I'm going to try to, one sec, I need water. The thing here that we're trying to get at is wages are sticky. That means that wages don't change. The price of a wage doesn't change like with the market, right? Remember we talked about this a little bit in micro, where your equilibrium doesn't necessarily, like if you have a shock to an economy and your demand or your supply shifts, it doesn't necessarily mean you immediately adjust to the new price and new output, right? And the new quantity. That's the idea here. Wages are focused on specifically here because they're a very important part of the macro economy. Employment, right? The more or less people there are that are employed, the more or less that directly influences what output we can produce, okay? And so because it takes time, sometimes a lot of time, for the wage market specifically to adjust to a new equilibrium, new micro equilibrium, right? And this is where, no, the class is not cumulative in the sense that we're not going to talk about like taxes and price floors and stuff, but you still need to know how to calculate an equilibrium. We're going to be talking about the wage market specifically, the labor market specifically. But if the labor, because the labor market takes time to adjust, right? We talked about this a couple, like last week. There were a lot of really good questions that people had about, well, why are there so many like job openings if there are so many people who are still unemployed? And sometimes it just, not sometimes, all the time, it just takes wages, which is the price of labor, time to adjust. And in that time where it's not adjusting really, we call that the short run, okay? That's the short run, where it hasn't adjusted to the new equilibrium. Okay, there are other input prices that are similar to, so wages is a big one. Other inputs to a macro economy, you can think of like electricity or oil, things that are like make the world go round, kind of. I'm trying to think of another big one, but like you might think of like I mean, internet is probably one today, but I don't think your book calls it one, like things that are necessary for the economy to move. So though, if those things, if their market equilibrium changes, if their equilibrium price changes, but they haven't adjusted to it quite yet, those things are also sticky. In the short run, they don't move. So how do we determine the difference between the short run and the long run? Well, if we say that we're in the, if those things have changed, if wages have changed, if input prices have changed to the new equilibrium, then we're in the long run. That's all that it means. That's just how it's defined. It's kind of like a backwards definition. Does that make sense? So long run means wages, input prices have changed. They're at their new equilibrium points. Short run means they're sticky. They haven't moved yet. So we're in the short run. Okay. Okay. Then there are going to be some short run shifters of aggregate supply, changes in input prices. So things like oil, electricity, energy, any type of energy thing. Short run shifters, changes in nominal wages. Okay, this is nominal, not real wages. So if the price changes, right? So literally, if these things change, short run aggregate supply is going to change. And we're going to talk about what that means. It's going to change to the long run equilibrium, okay? But changes in nominal wages and then changes in productivity, okay? So what does that mean? Like in the context of what we've talked about already, if human capital, if people become more productive, if technological progress increases or decreases, I guess is possible. It's very rare, but it does happen. Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
I'm going to write that down. Technological progress. Human capital. So if I'll call it HC goes up, then short run aggregate supply shifts right. Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I was like, oh shoot, now I have to think about this because I hadn't thought about it in my head. I hate, sorry, don't hate anything. Okay. So I'm sorry, give me 1 second. So nominal wages go up, that means that labor is more expensive, which means it costs more. So if wages go up, then short run aggregate supply goes down. Or sorry, shifts left, right? Because really that means that it becomes more expensive at every point. So it shifts left. And if you read the book and you're like, that's wrong, Jacob, feel free to say that to me, okay? But yeah, it should shift left. And then same thing for input prices. If input prices go up because things become more expensive. So it's for each, like just mechanically, if you have things are more expensive, then at the same price level, you can do less output. That's all that it means, right? So it would shift to the left. Okay, good question. Actually, I should have said that right away. But remember, these input prices, these are not the price level, right? They do not equal the price level. The price level is an aggregation. It's like CPI or GDP deflator, the things that we've talked about, right? Just because the price of a good, of a market changes, doesn't mean that the entire, now, if it's a big thing, the price level might change a little bit one way or the other, but we don't know exactly how it's going to change because you have substitution effects and things we're not going to get into right now. But I want to separate out, we have an aggregate price level and we have market level prices. Okay, aggregate price level, think CPI, GDP deflator. Market level prices, think equilibrium, efficiency, what we've talked about in micro 101 or in micro unit 1, right? Where, bless you, where we had multiple, like where we had a specific market, okay? Okay, long run aggregate supply. In the long run, the level of real GDP is determined by the supply of labor, capital, and technology, not the price level. Okay, so what does that mean? So, okay, how can I think about this? So, if we have something that is determined by labor, capital, and technology, and not the price level, and our graph has price level on the y-axis and output on the x-axis. What does that mean? Like, what shape will our long-run aggregate supply curve look like? It's vertical, right? Okay, we're not gonna use the terms inelastic here, because again, the price level is not, we're not looking at just one good and behavior changes. But that's the idea, right? If the long-run aggregate supply does not depend on the price level, then it's going to be vertical. For every price level, we have the same amount of long-run aggregate supply. That makes sense, right? Our output should not depend on some arbitrary theoretical number that exists. Our output depends on like what we can do, right? Like what we as people can do. Like that's should hopefully intuitively make sense for us. In the long run, what we can do for a sustained amount of time, right? And that should depend on how many laborers we have, which is why the labor market is very important for the macroeconomy, how much capital we have, which is why both the government and the physical capital are important, and our technology, okay? So if any of those things change, then long-run aggregate supply can shift. But if those things don't change, then long-run aggregate supply is not going to shift. So that gets to things that shift both short-run and long-run aggregate supply. Well, if you have a change in the labor force, that's going to change long-run aggregate supply, all else equal. If you have a change in capital, either human or physical capital, that's going to change the long-run aggregate supply curve, right? Just because that's what it is. And if you have technological changes, okay? So if wages change, that's going to change the labor force, who's in the labor force, that will change that. We'll talk, we'll get to it, okay? But what I would like for you to do is when we get to mechanisms through which the aggregate demand and aggregate supply can change, what I would like is for you to come back to these slides and look at them again. And it'll be like, okay, so these are the changes. It's important to know these changes. I know how if it says one thing changes, then I'm going to shift it this way or that way. But then I want you to revisit this after we go through some of the chapters, okay? Okay, so in the short run, macroeconomic equilibrium looks just the same as the long run, or as the microeconomic equilibrium. You have some price level star, and you have some output Y star. You have short run aggregate supply, you have aggregate demand, and you're going to have your aggregate demand curve be something that's a function of the price level, right? So maybe it's like price level like 100 minus Y, and then SRAS is going to be 2 plus Y or something like that. To figure out the price level. Sorry, these should just be price level. To figure out the equilibrium price level and equilibrium output in the short run, set them equal, solve. Okay, we're not going to go over it. Then when we get to the long run, okay, what we have is, shoot, we're out of time here. In our long run equilibrium, we have all three graphs crossing. Okay, we have the short run, aggregate supply, the aggregate demand, and then the long run aggregate supply curve is crossing them at that point. That means that we're in long run equilibrium. Okay. How is it drawn out like this? Okay. Now let's talk about two new big terms. We've talked about a little bit, but recession and expansion. If this is our LRAS, this is our SRAS, and this is our aggregate demand. Okay. Recession is when output has gone down, okay, or it's below our long run. Another way of thinking about it is when it's below our long run equilibrium. So let's say for some reason there's a shock to aggregate demand. What's a non-COVID example? Maybe I don't know, some shock to aggregate demand. Interest rates fall or something or change. Aggregate demand goes down. We're right here. Then our output, we'll call this Y1, does not equal our long run output, YL. And then this is called a recessionary gap. Okay. If your long run output is higher than your current output, or oh shoot. I said YL, I take it back completely. This is potential. That's a big oh shoot. Forgot to. Okay, potential output. I was supposed to define this term and I completely forgot, I guess. YP is at long run equilibrium. Okay, so write that down. Wherever the long run equilibrium is, that's your potential. That's where potential output is. Okay. I'm not even going to say that. I'm going to say long run aggregate supply. Because you don't have to be in equilibrium to know where your potential output is going to be. Okay. So wherever the long run aggregate supply curve is, that's your potential sustained long run output. If potential output's higher than current output, you have a recessionary gap. Then if you have long run aggregate supply, SRAS, the aggregate demand, and for some reason, let's say your SRAS is shifted to the right. YP, Y1. This right here is going to be where your current output is higher than your potential output. Now, what does that mean practically, right? Like, how can it be the case that your current output can be higher than potential output? Remember, I said the word sustain. Your potential output, your long run, is where you can have a sustained amount of output over a long period of time. So this is just something where you can't sustain it, right? Maybe people like are working overtime. You have factories working overtime. You have machines working overtime. They're not working at their efficient amount that they can sustain over a long period of time. But because of some imbalance in the market, in the wage market, or in the input price market, they are working more than they would like to capture like short-term gains, okay? Does that make sense?
Isn't it still lower outside?
I'm sorry, is what low?
Is the,
Oh, the price level is lower here, but
oh, but the,
yeah, but the output is not, yeah, so we don't determine whether we're in a recession or expansion based on the price level, although we can figure out if we have inflation or not based on the price level. But we do determine, we base it off of what our output is, our real GDP. That's a good question. So this is called an expansionary gap. Expansion. Your book might also say an inflationary gap. Does it say inflationary? Does anybody know?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's fine, inflationary gap. I will interchangeably use them, I'm sure, throughout the class. I think I just said expansion. But yeah, it's an inflationary gap. Yeah, okay, so I think that's everything. So yeah, we actually got through all of the slides, which I wasn't thinking would happen, which means that I probably need to review a little bit on Monday. So I'll probably review these, yeah.
is the, for the recession part, is it the gap between what, meaning why when you-
Yeah, the gap, yeah, so the gap between this distance, no, you're good, don't say sorry. This distance is the recessionary gap, okay? So a question that you might be asked on a test, just for those of you who would like to think like, what does this matter as far as me passing this class, is there's some policy, it shifts aggregate, short-run aggregate supply or aggregate demand by this much. You have to tell me which way it shifts it, and then you have to solve for the current output, potential output, and tell me what the amount of the gap is. Something like that. That could be a potential question, those types of things. Christopher.
Why does one shift to SRA? and SMH?
I totally arbitrarily picked that. Yeah, sorry, so it doesn't mean what, like an expansion doesn't mean that SRAS increases, like or shifts to the right. It just means that our current output is higher than our potential output. That could be from a shift in aggregate demand, right? It could be a shift to the right in aggregate demand too that causes that. Good question though. Okay, reminders, no recitations next week. So for planning, still lectures on Monday, Wednesday, no office hours today, have them tomorrow 1 to 3. Writing assignment 2 available to start. Problem set 2 due tomorrow night. Start reading chapter 18, not 17. Yeah. Next Wednesday, it's not Thursday. I think it says Wednesday, but it is Wednesday. You got to turn in before break, Wednesday. Okay. And also remember, if you don't want to do it, you get to drop your lowest one, and there are 3 of them. So, right. So I would like you to do it, but I'm saying if you're like, I don't want to do this, then just don't. Okay. But then you have to do the 3rd one if you want to get full credit, right? Like, so just balance out what you're going for here. Okay. Okay. Have a good week. I'll see you guys hopefully tomorrow in office hours. Yeah, if you email me and I told you to come down, talk to me, Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week.